Welcome to Talking Points. My name is Dr. Stephen E. Gardner, and I'm here providing you another segment in our series on self-care and service. We have looked at the power of rest. We've looked at the power of reflection, and we began to look at the power of renewal. Rest pertains to the physical body getting the rest that it needs as a way of self-care or a means of self-care. Reflection is a way of getting the mind in the right type of frame of attitude, in the right type of direction, whereby we can also experience the kind of mental relaxation and mental focus that can enable us to move forward in service. And then last week we began to open up the power of renewal. And specifically we're talking about spiritual renewal. And this is the spiritual dimension of our lives, because we all have a body, we all have a mind, we all have a soul, and we all have a spirit. And this unit, this human being, the innermost recesses of our human being is our spirit. And it's that part of us that prior to salvation that hungered for a desire for God. And some of you that may have not had an opportunity to get to know God, this is kind of a step in that direction. But it speaks to people who have had a relationship with God, and then they find themselves at a time in their life where they are spiritually depleted. We talked about that last week. And we're going to look at an example of what from the Bible as how that can be understood, how that can be illustrated. It doesn't matter what kind of person that you are. It doesn't matter what kind of believer or pastor that you are. At some time or another in your life, you're going to encounter a time to where you're going to sense spiritually depletion. And we need to know what to do about it. Well, I'm going to look at one of the causes, and not only a cause, but also an example of how, especially people of faith, can get into a mode by which they find themselves needing spiritual renewal. And then we're going to look at some activities. We're going to look at some other examples, maybe in the next week or so that we can find out what we can do in order to get ourselves out of this spiritual rut, or out of this place whereby we are not our best self. We're not the best version of Christ to the world. We've been burning the candle at both ends. We love God, but we find ourselves spiritually depleted. So let's get right into our lesson today. Self-care and service, the power of renewal. Welcome to another segment as we delve into several spiritual renewal practices that are designed for self-care. Let's start this out with a passage of scripture from the Old Testament. And here we're looking in the book of Psalms, chapter 85, verse 6. And it says, "Will you not revive us again, that your people may rejoice in you?" Will you not revive us again, that your people may rejoice in you? Well, in this context, Israel found themselves in a bad spot, mostly due to their own causing. They acknowledged the fact that Yahweh can revive them again. They knew where to look, and they knew just who to look for. The question that I want to ask the listening audience, are you in a bad spot spiritually? Do you feel spiritually forsaken? Maybe this message is for you, or maybe it is for someone that you know that's spiritually depleted. Well, if it's not for you and you're blessed by this segment, make sure that your friend, your loved one, will get an opportunity to see this. And you can see our website right there that you can go back and review any previous episode that we've had on Talking Points. It is www.drstevengardner.com, and there you can have access to all the previous episodes. So if you know somebody that is spiritually depleted, someone that would be blessed from this segment, take them and point them in that direction, because our hope is that you and others will find the resources that you need in order to experience spiritual renewal, in order for you to experience spiritual renewal again. So self-care is a comprehensive and holistic practice that can yield huge dividends physically, emotionally, and in our present focus, spiritually. It's a comprehensive and holistic practice. And so we've looked at the physical, as we've alluded to. We have looked at the mental and emotional. But we want to we want to unpack some more understanding about our need for spiritual renewal. You might be a churchgoer. You might be somebody that always went to church, goes to Bible study, goes to choir rehearsal, or whatever the case it might be. Yet, in all of this activity, you still may feel that there's something missing, that there's something lacking. I've got the religious activities, but I'm lacking the spiritual fervor or the spiritual renewal. I once had the joy of the Lord, but now it seems like that I've come to a dry spot in my walk with God, in my walk with Christ. This message on the power of spiritual renewal is a way by which we can, begin to find ourselves and begin to be pointed in the proper direction to get ourselves to a place to where we can get our spirit renewed again. Well, we're going to look at the prodigal out of Luke chapter 15, verses 11 through 24. And this parable of Jesus paints a portrait of pastors and parishioners, the body of Christ, churchgoers, seekers, or whatever the case it might be, those who have left religious, institutionalized church, who classify themselves as being spiritual, but love Jesus. This parable is about those individuals that may have lost their way or who have lost their way and found themselves in dire need of spiritual renewal. And let me say this. Each one of us from time to time will find ourselves needing spiritual renewal. So we're going to entitle this segment, Prodigal Pastors and Parishioners. So follow me as I'm reading from this particular version. And it says these words, Then said Jesus, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Give me the share of the property that will belong to me. So he divided the property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country. And there he squandered his property in dissolute living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in dire need. So he went and hired himself out one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to the field to feed pigs. And he would have gladly filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still afar off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quickly, bring a robe, the best one, and put it on, and put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf, and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead, and is alive again. He was lost, and is found.' And they began to celebrate." Now, we've heard this story. If you've been in church anytime, you've heard this story. You've heard pastors preach about the prodigal son. You've heard them put it in context with dealing with those who are lost, and even dealing with those who are backsliders. But I'm going to put it into a context to where not only pastors and parishioners can find themselves just like this prodigal at a place of spiritual depletion. Now, the interesting thing about this particular story is this parable, is that the son went to the father, and he said to the father, "Give me my portion." Now, when I used to hear this story told, I always would think about that he asked for his portion and he took off. And I never really paid attention to the fact that the father divided the portion up between the older and the younger. So both of them have received their equal portion. And we find that the younger son took off and he traveled to a distant country. And we know that he was engaged in riotous living. We know that he was about doing all kinds of things that were opposite or not congruent of how he was raised in his faith. Now, there's some things that we can look at. We can talk about that he got delved into sinful life. But let me talk about it. Let me bring it to make it plain for those who might be pastors or parishioners. Sometimes we can be so busy that our busyness becomes sinfulness. It wasn't so much the fact that this son had asked the father to give him his share. But what's most important is what he did after he got his share. That he took off, guess what? Without the father. He went into a direction, he had what he had, and now he's going to a distant place. But guess what? His father is not with him. Sometimes we may find ourselves, we may have gotten a new promotion on our job. We may have gotten assigned a new church. Or we may have received some promotion in the kingdom of God. We may have got a calling. We may have been ordained or whatever the case it might be. And I'm excited about the direction that God has me in. and boom, there I go. And I'm operating off the joy that comes along with this new assignment. Or it could be that I'm so busy doing God's work and that I don't have time to even spend time on doing self-work, on working for myself, or in other words, doing the things that my spirit needs in order that it can be replenished. We want to be people that minister to others out of the overflow. That means if I have a fountain flowing up from the inside, then I can take whatever cup and give you a drink, or you can come and drink at this fountain. And guess what? Because my fountain is replenishing itself, it never runs out. We can learn how to live in times where we can always get our spirit replenished. But we have to pay attention to those times when we recognize that we are not our spiritual best. We're not where we used to be. We're not where we want to be. And so we can get so busy with the work. So we can get so busy with life that we may be preparing sermons, pastors, and that might be the only time that week that you may have given thought to doing anything spiritually. Now that's an indictment to all of us, because I'm sure that some of us at some time or another have been so busy all week that I should have spent more time in prayer. I should have spent more time in the Word. Yet we all do it. And we need to recognize that our spiritual life should be more than sermon preparation or preparing for midweek service or whatever the case it might be. It needs to be some private time, some time that we set apart to focusing on our own spiritual needs by addressing the desert in our own life so that we can find an oasis from the Holy Spirit on the inside that comes from spending time with the Father and being with Him. In this particular story, we find that he had come to the place where it says that he spent, verse 14, he spent everything. That's like exhausting your capacity. That's like your battery is drained. And there was a severe famine in the land. Tell me when there's a famine that it's not a desert. And he began to be in need. And so he went and began to look and began to involve himself in things that he hoped that would replenish himself. But none of these things were good enough. And then finally, he had an aha moment. Finally, his eyes were open. Finally, he had an illumination. And he came to himself and realized it was much better in my Father's house. It was much better when I was with the Father, when I was spending quality time with Him, just me and Him, and not just to prepare sermons and not just prepare Bible study, but just me and Him so that my own soul can get the kind of care that it needs, that I can be the kind of servant, a servant of honor, meet for the Master's use. So he got up and he went to his father and he told his father, I've sinned against heaven. And then he had an acknowledgement, and this acknowledgement is key. He says, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Because of his absence from being with the Father, we find that he, had a lost sense of sonship. But yet his father had not given up on him. His father had compassion for him. It doesn't matter where he found himself. And let me tell you, pastors and parishioners, it doesn't matter where you have found yourself. The Father has not given up on you. He's still there with his arms stretched out with compassion, waiting for you to reunite with him in spiritual renewal. It is time for personal revival it's time for personal revival so we can have our personal breakthroughs and break out of some of these habits and break into the kind of purpose and the kind of lifestyle that God would have us to live, so that our cup does run over and we become a fountain that others can draw from. Yet, because of our fellowship and communion with God, our fountain never runs dry. Well, let's look at it. I want to bring your minds back. For those who grew up in the 80s and they were in church at that time, there's a song by Lionel Harris called "I Miss My Time With You." And you should go, if you got that song, you can get it on iTunes and go and listen to it. I call it the prodigal's song. And I'm going to just read a couple of stanzas from this song to try to give some sort of background and some sort of idea about the need for spiritual renewal, and how simple and easy it is to get ourselves to a place to where we become spiritually depleted. He said, there he was sitting or waiting in our old familiar place, an empty spot beside him where I used to wait, to be filled with strength and wisdom for the battles of the day. I would have passed him by again if I didn't hear him say, "I miss my time with you, those moments together. I need to be with you each day. And it hurts me when you say you're too busy trying to serve me. But how can you serve me when your spirit is empty? There's a longing in my heart, wanting more than just a part of you. And it's true. I miss my time with you." So obviously this is talking about God missing his time with you. It's about the Father missing his time with you. And there's an empty seat beside him that he's inviting all of us to come back and sit down and just spend time with him. Not for the purpose of getting ready to do the work, but for the purpose of personal, private worship, where it's just me and God alone, to get what I need, to get my spirit replenished, to satisfy the longing in my heart, to acknowledge the fact that not only do I miss the Father, but my Father misses me. So now, let's talk about the prodigal's return. And I'm going to leave with you today 8 points on this particular aspect of spiritual renewal. Number 1, he left without the Father. Let us make sure that whatever we do, whatever we're embarking upon, whatever assignment that we have, whatever work we involved in, whatever plow we got our hands to, let's not plow unless we're plowing with the Father. We need to have that fellowship. We need to have that intimacy with him, that communion with him while we work. 2, he became too busy apart from the Father. Again, alluding back, we can become so busy with the work that the work kind of separates us from the Father. And we may not realize it, but it happens over time. Thirdly, he entered into willful exile. Sometimes, God's people found themselves in exile. But here, when we engage in activities, when we are too busy and we're not keeping up our time and our fellowship with him, we're willfully entering into exile. And you're going to find yourself where you become spiritually dry and spiritually depleted. It'll be a famine, and you're going to be without. You're going to spend all that you got, and you're going to find yourself in need. Number 5, he came to himself. Let's snap out of it. People of God, It's time to snap out of it. We need to come to ourselves and realize where we've been falling short and do whatever we need to do to renew our fellowship with him. We find that he experienced a lost sense of sonship. Well, let me tell you something. Sometimes we can get ourselves to a place of spiritual dryness till we feel like that we've let God down and we don't feel like that we are worthy enough. Well, let me tell you, you're always worthy. And God, even though we may let God down, but God will never let us down. He's going to always be there. He made up in his mind. He found out what his real problem was. And that's number 7. He returned to the Father. Sometimes that's all we need to do is find a way and find the time to get back with him. And number 8, even though he felt a lost sense of sonship, guess what? God the Father never gave up on his sonship, but he did regain his fellowship. Well, I trust you have been blessed today on the power of spiritual renewal, part 2. We pulled out a couple of verses, and in these verses, our goal was to, number 1, we showed there in Psalm 85 and 6, that yes, is Yahweh, yes, is God that will revive the people of God if they so ask. We learned here in the prodigal in Luke 15:11 through 24 that it's a portrait of pastors and parishioners who may have lost their way and found themselves in a dire need of spiritual renewal. So next week we're going to come back with part 3 of the power of renewal. And we're going to look at some real solid steps by which we can apply on a personal level that will bring us to the kind of depth in God, that place where we can, strike oil, as it were, or find that well of replenishing so that we can be better servants and better citizens of God's kingdom. May God bless you. We'll look forward to seeing you again next week here on Talking Points.